Now, I want you to understand that there is a very specific formula for excellence. And the formula requires a person who has a clear purpose. But there are two other ingredients that put this together. The first thing is called competence. You know what competence is? Somebody who does something really well. The more competent they are, the better they are at doing something. The third thing is called accountability. Accountability means if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And if someone asks you to do something, you do it really well. And if you combine a person who's on purpose with a high level of competence and accountability, you have excellence in an individual. I run 3 companies, and all 3 companies, my teams are very high on their purpose scale. They better align with my purpose. They have a very high level of competence, and they are very high on the accountability scale. And I don't even bother them. I never even manage them. Because if they're not competent, accountable, and on purpose, they're going to stand out with the rest of the culture, and other people are going to be doing their job, and they are not going to keep up. And I say to my staff, I run an Olympic level team. You have to be able to play at an Olympic level. If you can't be competent and accountable on purpose, there's nothing personal. We just have to cut you because we're moving at a fast pace. So now, if you look at what it takes now to maintain a healthy culture so that a group of people can work well together, it requires the same 3 things. A person who has a clear purpose, let's say your purpose was to change the world and my purpose was to change the world. And if you and I shared the same purpose, we would be heading in the same direction. Would you agree? And if we're headed in the same direction, that movement in the same direction begins to create what's called trust. That invisible thing called trust. And if you're competent and accountable and moving in that direction, and I'm competent and accountable and moving in the same direction, you have trust in a community. And one of the biggest problems in the United States, companies that want to become Fortune 100 companies, this is their problem. Nobody trusts anybody. Because they're too competitive, they're angry, they have no emotional intelligence, they don't know how to work together in teams, and because of that, they have no trust in the community and the culture can't sustain itself. Are you with me still? So now, why do we lose sight of our purpose? Why do we lose sight of our vision? Why do we make the wrong choices? Why do we say we're going to do something and all of a sudden we do something else? And the number one reason is called stress. And when you see a predator in your life, like a lion or a cougar, you turn on a primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system. And the moment you turn on that fight or flight nervous system, you are going to mobilize enormous amounts of energy to prepare yourself for some threat in your external environment. Now, Mexico. This is pretty adaptive. If you're being chased by a lion, you better have the energy. So when that happens, you're moved out of balance. Your pupils dilate, your salivary juices shut off, not a time to eat an enchilada. Your respiratory rate changes, your heart rate changes, and blood is sent to your extremities, and you're either going to run, fight, or hide. That's your 3 options. Run away, fight back, or freeze and hide. That's what people do. But what if it's not a lion? What if it's your mother-in-law? And you've had some tough experiences with your mother-in-law. Do you know that you'll react to your mother-in-law just like she was a lion? Now, what was once highly adaptive is now very maladaptive. Because as you see the coworker, as you respond to the news, as you make a judgment, as you get angry, you are turning on the same system as if you were being chased by a predator. and you are moving your brain and body out of balance. And the definition of stress is when your body moves out of balance. And all organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress. The zebra gets chased by the lion. The zebra sees the lion, mobilizes all this energy, and now it escapes the lion. 15 minutes later, it goes back to grazing, and the event is over, and the body returns back to homeostasis. But human beings, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. Bills are adding up, rent is overdue, problems at work, and as you think about those problems, you turn on the stress response just by thought alone. And when you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, you are headed for some disease. Because no organism in nature can live in emergency mode for extended periods of time and expect to function healthily. So then reason this. The scientific facts are that 70% of the time people are living in stress. And when you live in stress, it's not a time to create. When you live in stress, it's not a time to be defined by a vision of the future. When you live in stress, it's not a time to go within or to learn. When you live in stress, all of your attention is on the outer world and not on the inner world because there's danger out there. And so people stop creating when they're living in stress, and now they are viewing their life through a lens of the past, and they lose sight of where they're going. So here's that definition where I talked about of creating different states of being. You react to an experience in your life. If you allow the chemicals to run days, all of a sudden you say, I'm in a mood. If it lasts for weeks or months, I have a bad temperament. If it lasts for years on end, it's part of my personality. And all you need is one experience to do this, and you'll forget about your vision. So we live in two states of mind. Our animal nature is to live in survival and to live in stress. And the chemicals of stress are highly addictive. Fear, anger, hostility, violence, anxiety, insecurity, guilt, shame, sadness, unworthiness, depression. They are all created from the hormones of stress. When people live by this state, they use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm the addiction to that emotion. They need it so they can get the rush of adrenaline. And this is why it's so hard to change. Because it is a scientific fact that the long-term effects of the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons and create disease. And I just said you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. That means your thoughts can make you sick. So if your thoughts could make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts could make you well? That's what our research is about. And if you know that the hormones of stress are highly addictive, and you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, you can become addicted to your own thoughts. And this is why change is so hard. Because people cling to those emotions because it makes them feel something. So living in survival is living in stress. It's being in what's called catabolism or tissue breakdown. There's disease, there's imbalance, there's degeneration, the emotions of fear and anger and sadness. People tend to be selfish when they live by the hormones of stress, because when you're under stress, you got to take care of yourself. So keep putting things bad on the news, keep creating fear, keep showing war, keep people feeling less than, and of course, they'll stay selfish and never create community. It's a great way to control people. When you're living in stress, you focus on three things: everything in your environment, your body, and time. Because if you're being chased by a lion, you're going to put your attention on your body, you're going to become aware of where you're going to run in your environment, and you're going to think about how much time you have. And if you live by the body, the environment, and time, you are not being defined by a vision. Because a vision has nothing to do with your body, the environment, and time. It has to do with a thought. So then you're in emergency mode. You'll get very object focused. You'll focus on something over and over again. How many people have problems and you keep thinking about your problems over and over again, over and over again? That's how survival works in the brain. You keep focused on your problems. You feel separate from possibility. You define reality with your senses. You're living by cause and effect. You don't see any possibilities. Of course, your brain and heart are incoherent. We've measured this thousands of times. In other words, when you are impatient and you're frustrated and you're angry, your brain gets out of balance. And when your brain gets incoherent, you get incoherent. We measure people's hearts. We just came from a beautiful event in Cabo San Lucas in Los Cabos, 500 people, training them how to train their brain and hearts. When you're impatient and frustrated, your heart gets incoherent. When you feel love and gratitude, your heart gets coherent. When you feel love and gratitude, your brain gets coherent. So then, people in emergency mode focus on knowns. They don't want the unknown. The unknown is dangerous. They want knowns and familiar. They lose their vision. The divine aspect of ourselves are the creative aspect of ourselves. That's when the body moves into homeostasis. We go from contraction to expansion. There's anabolism. There's body repairs itself. There's order. There's health. There's regeneration. The elevated emotions of love, joy, of trust, of knowingness, of gratitude, they begin to produce 1,300 new chemicals that begin to heal the immune system. The hormones of stress produce 1,200 chemicals that last for 90 seconds to 2 minutes that alters how we think and feel. But isn't your definition of an addiction something you can't stop? So if I said, hey, I know you're really angry, but why don't you stop? If you can't stop your anger, then you're addicted. Valid or not, justified or not. If you can't stop your sadness, then you must be addicted to those chemicals. But those chemicals only last for 90 seconds to 2 minutes, which means, I tell my kids this all the time, well, they're older, but when they were younger, if you're angry for more than 2 minutes, you're faking it. So, when you open your heart, you're selfless. When you're in that creative state, you're not defined by things, you're not defined by your body, you're not defined by time. We know this, we've studied it in the brain thousands of times. A creative person forgets that they even have a body. They forget about the things and people in their life, they forget about time. They're in the creative state. And my definition of creation is when you forget about yourself. You go from selfish to selfless. And that's when you're at your best. We've proved it thousands of times. Of course, energy is created. There's always growth and repair. People tend to go from a narrow focus to possibility, to an open focus. They feel connected to their vision. They feel connected to people. They feel connected to something greater. They're already defining reality beyond their senses. They're living no longer as a victim, which means most people think unconsciously that their personal reality is creating their personality. If your personal reality is creating your personality, then you're a victim. But if your personality is creating your personal reality, you're a creator. So now they're causing an effect. They're no longer living by cause and effect. They see possibilities. Brain and heart are in a state of coherence and balance. And of course, they crave the unknown. They want the experience. They want the adventure. They live for it. So I'll go through just 3 more slides. So then if your purpose is to go east, and all of a sudden you head to Phoenix, Arizona, or Missoula, Montana, or Miami, Florida, or Boston, Massachusetts, you've lost sight of your vision, and which means you had some thought that led to some choice, that led to some behavior, that created some experience, that produced some feeling or emotion, and you gave up on your vision. You went back to the old self. So you may say, God, I want to be healthy, but you made a wrong choice. 3 pieces of birthday cake, you miss a week of exercise, you stay up late and watch TV, you stop getting treated, and of course now, same thought leads to the same choice, which leads to the same behavior, which creates the same experience, that produces the same feeling, and then you say, oh gosh. And then of course the feeling is usually unworthiness or guilt, and you return back to the same self. I want to show you one slide, okay? I want to show you what it looks like when you learn something new. You have 100 billion neurons in your brain. 100 billion neurons. The number of connections you have in one neuron is between 10,000 and 40,000 connections. If you took 100 billion sheets of paper and you stacked them on top of each other, it would be 5,000 miles high. That's the distance from Los Angeles to London. If you took a scoop of gray matter, the size of a grain of sand, you would have 100,000 neurons in it with over 1 billion connections. Now, I'll stop right after this slide. Learning is making new synaptic connections. Every time you learn something new, this is what's happening in your brain, geniuses. If you learned one bit of information today, your brain did this. Boom. That's learning. Physical evidence as a result of your interaction in the environment. Every time you learn something in your brain, there's a physical change that takes place, and learning is making new connections. Are you with me? This is how fast it happens, too. That's learning. If you learn anything this week, you've made a footprint. If learning is making new synaptic connections, then if you keep firing the same thoughts over and over again, you're going to wire them in your brain. So then if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining them. And all of a sudden, they develop a long-term relationship. And just like any relationship, the more you communicate, the more they connect. And neurons are exactly the same way. Now, as you begin to learn information, neurons tend to assemble themselves into networks, or what's called neural networks. And neural networks are just gangs of neurons that have fired and wired together to form a community of neurosynaptic connections that's related to a thought, a skill, a habit, a behavior, a concept. And neural networks are automatic programs. You have a neural network to brush your teeth, to put on makeup, to speak a language, to walk. All of a sudden, those neurons then form a hardware circuitry, but if you keep repeating it, the hardware becomes a software program and it becomes automatic. So then, you want to see a thought? Watch. Boom, there's a thought. Right there. Watch again. Boom. That's a thought. You generate more electrical impulses in your brain in one day than all the cell phones on the planet put together. And it's not coming from the candy bar you just ate. You are connected to a greater field. So then, in closing, and I'll take some questions, you are here this week to begin to understand knowledge and information that is essential for you to begin to apply. Knowledge is power, but knowledge about yourself is self-empowerment. And we are in a time in the world where we need leaders. And true leadership has to do with a vision of the future. As the old models begin to break down in government, in the economy, in religion, in education, in the environment, in medicine. Something new has to be created. And we should never shrink from these models collapsing. It's a sign that something greater has to happen. Innovation, creation, invention is our future.